Good afternoon and welcome to the 2021 Chicago Humanities Fall Festival. I'm Allison Cuddy, I'm the artistic director at the festival, and it's great to see all of you here for this program, which is about imagining Chicago's future, a film, screening, and conversation. So the name of the film is To Render the Infinite, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the two women who are responsible for bringing it to us today. So zakkiyyah Najiba Dumas O'Neill is an artist and curator. I'm so fortunate we were able to work with her this year because she's had a very fulsome and busy year. Her practice extends in multiple directions, and it's most often initiated by personal and social histories related to family legacy, queerness, community making, and intimacy. Zakkiyyah is currently an artist in residence at the University of Chicago's Art and Public Life Initiative, and is co-founder of CBIM, Concerned Black Image Makers, a collective-driven project that prioritizes shared experiences and concerns by lens-based artists of the Black diaspora. Ayana Contreras composed the soundtrack, the score for this film, and she's also had a super busy and productive year. She's a cultural historian, a radio DJ, an archivist who hosts the Reclaimed Soul program on WBEZ and Vocalo Radio. She's a columnist for Downbeat magazine, and her book on post-civil rights era cultural history titled Energy Never Dies, Afro-Optimism and Creativity in Chicago will be coming out in December of this year. So sometimes the festival gets to commission work with the support of great partners and sponsors, and that's certainly been the case with this project. Our main partner on this is the Chicago Film Archives, which is headed by Nancy Watrous, who is here with us today. And in fact, this project was inspired by a long-running program at CFA called Media Mixer, which invites artists into the archive of film history having to do with the Midwest to create new works from that and matches those filmmakers with musicians to create a score. So that was sort of the inspiration for this, and we tweaked it by focusing it on a theme that's of great concern to all of us right now, which is thinking about what is the future of our city? What will Chicago be like? But trying to imagine that future by looking at the past. So that was the role of the Film Archives, and Nancy, thank you so much for your support. And this program is also in partnership with Art Design Chicago Now, which is an initiative funded by the Terra Foundation of American Art, and it amplifies the voices of Chicago's creatives, past, present, and future, and explores the essential role they play in shaping the now. So we're going to start with the screening of To Render the Infinite, and then Ayana and zakkiyyah are going to come on stage for a conversation. A reminder that with our COVID protocols, we are not doing Q&As at our programs, but I know that this program will produce lots of thoughts in all of you, and I hope you will talk amongst yourself, and I hope that the film resonates with you in the coming days. So here's To Render the Infinite.
The human race concerns me, and everything that implies, which is the most ambitious thing you can say, and at the same time the most modest too, because I can't think of anything that people do where conflict is born that isn't dramatically interesting. And of course it's the role of the dramatist to select which part is most interesting.
Yeah, I'm a man.
How you gonna feel on the inside?
I'm gonna feel fine.
You won't have nothing left.
I'm gonna feel fine. I looked that man right in his eye. All right, Mr. Charlie. All right, Mr. Lindler. That's your neighborhood out there. You want to keep it that way? You got a right to keep it that way. Just give me that money and the house is yours. And I'll feel fine. Fine. I say, well, Matt, I say, you give me that money and you won't have to live next door to no bunch of stinking...
Walter!
I'll feel fine. Maybe I'll get down on my black knees. All right, Mr. Charlie. All right, Mr. Great White Father. You just give us that money, and we won't come out there and dirty up your white folks' neighborhood. And I'll feel fine. Fine! Fine!
Lorraine, you said in an interview, I think, that you wrote A Raisin in the Sun from a specific intellectual point of view.
Yes, I happen to believe that the most ordinary human being, to almost repeat what I just said, has within him elements of profundity, a profound anguish, that there is, you don't have to go to the kings and queens of the earth. I think the Greeks and the Elizabethans did this because it was a logical concept, but every human being is an enormous conflict about something, even if it's how you get to work in the morning and all of that. So that I thought that it would be very interesting in the contemporary American theatrical moment to explore the most ordinary man, say, on the south side of Chicago. We think we know.
Rain makes a recording.
My Lord, he calls me. He calls me by the thunder. The trumpet sounds within my soul. And I ain't got long to stay. Steal away. Steal away, steal away to Jesus. Steal away home. I ain't got long to stay here.
Ready to go, my son? You tired?
His jacket say Young Life though. He
No, I'm asking. Huh? What do you got?
He said you got some more burgers and I'm like, they not cooking and I ain't cooking no more. I'm giving them to you, so.
Yeah, what the?
This green, I don't even want to look at them.
And we won't come out there and dirty up your white folks' neighborhood. And I'll feel fine.
I am audacious enough to think of myself as an artist. There is both joy and beauty and illumination and communion between people to be achieved through the dissection of personality. That's what I want to do. I want to reach a little closer to the world, which is to say to people, and see if we can share some illuminations together about each other.
So,
I feel like we haven't really talked about this work outside of some email interactions, which is an interesting way of working on this sort of thing that was sort of necessitated by sort of the times that we're in. So I guess I'm curious, I saw that you had a lot of work from Don McElvain, who, if you're not familiar, amazing West Side muralist, cat, like outrageous. So it was very interesting seeing this intimate film from, I mean, presumably people that he knew. And Peter Kuttner, also wonderful human being.
Oh, those Kuttner films were my favorite.
Yeah, so tell me about going through the experience of sort of digging into the film archives and sort of what you were looking for this piece, if anything.
Yeah, thank you for that thoughtful question. I feel like when I sort of was going into the archive, I had a very ambitious idea that was very specific about what I wanted to look for, which sort of began as really looking for some sort of visual intimacy involving Black women or Black family life, and I think I shared this with you earlier, vividly looking for moments of leisure within Black life that was sort of outside of the containment of like urban life or what we know to be urban life. And so I feel like by the time I had started going through the archive started guiding me, and I started to focus more on like what was sort of drawing me in and what I had particular emotional responses to. And so I feel like that intimate footage that you just referenced from the McElvain collection was, it was just very vivid and intimate for me. And I think the beauty of the sort of technology that came about at that time period, folks were just able to sort of capture, well, not capture, but like document their everyday experience in a way that feels intimate and that feels more intuitive and less methodical. And so I was really drawn to that footage for that particular reason. And then the Kuttner films are almost in a kind of way not intuitive. They are in a way very methodical. And I was really curious about how Black women were being visualized in those films. And so the titles of the films that I particularly pulled from that archive were Mary Had a Little Lamb and Tackle is a Girl's Best Friend. And I was like, Tackle is a girl's best friend? What is this about? And so I was really sort of drawn to the ways that there seemed to be this gender critique in those films. And so then those films started to dictate the way that I wanted to sort of move through the imagery and edit that footage. And so to a certain degree, I had to lose a certain amount of control and just allow myself to be guided by that.
It's interesting because the McElvain stuff, for me as a person, I've seen quite a bit of older footage. It's actually rarer than you might think to have that level of leisure be caught, because it wasn't like people had cameras on that they're walking around in the world with on a regular basis. Like, people took out a camera if they had the luxury of having a camera, right? We're talking about 1960s, a lot of this footage. They were taking it out for very specific occasions, right? Like maybe Christmas or a birthday or the birth of a child or something like that. It wasn't like, unless you had someone who was an enthusiast or a professional of some sort. So it's always wonderful for me to see just sort of uncuffed moments of everyday life from decades past.
Yes.
So
I like how you phrase that, uncuffed moments.
Yeah, because otherwise it's very, and what's so ironic about it is now, and here we go with my critique, right? I feel like now that we have the luxury of having the camera on our phone, it still feels very structured and very stiff and very studied, a lot of the footage that's being created right now. There's just so much more footage, but there's still not a lot of that, where people are literally just like lounging and being beautiful and wearing gray and coral in interesting ways. You know,
the colors.
The color.
The
I mean, that
colors
was
were
the
so
other thing.
Seductive for me.
That's also something that not everybody was doing, because color development is a pretty expensive process, especially back then. Like, so to have that much beautiful color, I mean, Don was clearly about that life. Let's put it like that. It's just
And I also just want to point out, there was a particular moment from the Don footage of this woman who was wearing like this red coral lipstick, and she's wearing this sweater, I think, that has like
the gray,
brown and gray. Right. And I was also really in terms of the intimacy, my sort of ties or directions towards that were through the hands. And like, anyone who knows me knows that I have an obsession with hands in visual images, and I take like compulsive screenshots of hands, like when I'm watching films on my computer, or if I see them within an artist's work, and I just have like an archive of that. And so I think in that particular moment, I felt like there was something like really sublime about just sort of sitting with that woman and focusing on this private moment that she seems to be having amongst other people in a space, because there's obviously, as you referenced, like there's something celebratory happening. I think it was a Christmas party or some kind of holiday party, but she seemed to sort of exist in her own pleasure in a certain kind of way, or intimacy that was not directed towards, I think, like everyone else in the room. And those moments, I think, were very like compelling for me. But I wanted to ask you some questions. I have a lot of questions. So I noticed through, and if you all haven't already known, like Ayana created the score for this project. And I noticed that there were a few transitions with the music throughout the film that sort of were this balance, at least that I sort of felt, between moments of like that were very heightened, and there was like frustration or some sort of anger being expressed, and then moments that would kind of come back down that were very calm and peaceful. So I would love to hear you maybe talk about those transitions and what your experience was like developing sound in response to the visual images, or maybe in response to like your own reaction or archives that you work with.
So what was very interesting was, looking at the film initially, my initial reaction was there felt like there was a real ebb and flow in sort of the pacing and the energy of it, and I wanted to reflect that sonically in a way that wasn't cheesy. The other thing that was really obvious was that the ebb felt, I don't want to say terse, but there was like definitely an emotional thing happening. And what was very interesting, and this is a little aside, I really love subtitles. I always use subtitles with every video I watch all the time, and not for any hearing reason, but really just because I just want to read, or I like language, if that makes sense. So just being able to really grasp it in every single way. But I thought it was very interesting, like the adjectives that the person who did the captions here were using. So like the part where I was thinking, it was kind of like, I don't know, creepy sounding. They were like uplifting music. I'm like, I mean, it's definitely, there's definitely an emotional ebb happening. So I see what they're saying. And this isn't me being critical. It was just, it's sort of like you put something into the world, and you know what you were thinking when you put it in the world, but you're curious as to how other people are feeling it, and are you in fact communicating the thing that you think you're communicating? So they were sort of that. In terms of the music, so the first thing I wanted to do is really think about what might have been in the background in some of these moments, like realistically. What could have very well been in that basement rumpus room Christmas situation at that time, and then deconstruct it, because it seemed as though the way that you were playing with loops and patterns with the film, I could do the same thing sonically. And I'm going to tell you exactly what the song is now, because I know it's in your head. So the song was, in fact, and also I wanted to use Chicago musicians, like that was important to me. So it is a little snippet of The Look of Love by the Impressions. And it's like a very strange recording from them. Like, if I remember correctly, it's one of the last recordings they made before Curtis Mayfield left ABC Records to start his own Curtom label. We could go real deep in that, but we're not going to do that today.
I know you can go deep into it.
But I mean, it's interesting because it's sort of like, these are the songs that didn't make these other albums, if that makes sense. You can tell that ABC is like trying to do this cash-in record, but the version of The Look of Love was so haunting. And it also has this feeling of, so before people were stepping, they were walking and they were bopping, right? And I wanted that feeling, that movement, that sensation to sort of be the guiding rhythm that pulled us forward in this. The other thing that I used is so funny, they're like space sounds, electronic sounds. I'll tell you what that one is. I'm going way inside baseball. So it is a combination of a syndrome, which is, it's a, I guess, sensory synthesizer from the 70s. It's that thing that goes, boo, in disco records and lovers rock records. They couldn't figure out how to do anything else with it. But I used that, and then I would play it backwards. So it was like I reversed it, and I did the same thing using a kalimba thumb piano. I would play it and then reverse it. And then the other one where it was uplifting music, that was actually an artist by the name of Garland Green, who's from Inglewood community. Really grew up in Inglewood in Chicago. Interesting story with him, just because I can't help myself. He was discovered singing in a pool hall by a guy who owned a barbecue shack who funded his education at the Chicago Conservatory of Music in the 1960s. So, totally irrelevant, but I don't know.
I feel like it is. I honestly, no, I feel like it is irrelevant because, I mean, the project in and of itself, in a kind of way, is site-specific, right? Like referencing Chicago, not just in terms of a history, but now just thinking about geography. And I think it's really important that you named kind of these sides of the city where these people came from, like thinking about the West Side, thinking about the South Side.
Right.
And that is important to cultural production and how culture is like produced here. But I want to go back to you taking the sound and like playing it backwards. Right. Because I think, I mean, not only is that, I think, a direct reference to thinking about the past, but also the sound that was produced from that. It's also futuristic at the same time, and I think it further illuminates this aspect of like past, present, future, which is articulated throughout the film. Yeah. But can I share my response to when I first heard the score that she created? I had just gotten the notification that Ayana had finished it, and she like emailed it to me, and I was on my way to meet with another friend who is like a really dear friend and mentor for me, and I stopped because I'm like, okay, I have time, I'm gonna watch this and listen to it, and I started crying. Like I instantly was like overcome with emotion because I felt that there was a lot of intention that was put into creating this sound. And part of it, I think for me, it felt otherworldly to me. And I think you used the perfect term, this term like haunting. And I think oftentimes when people think about something that is haunting, that there's something horrific or tragic about that. But I think for me, when I think about something that is haunting, it's like this continuous like repetition of something over and over and over again that you can't shake from yourself. And that was kind of like the feeling that erupted inside of me when I heard it paired with the images. Because I think for me also in a particular way, like some of these images do produce a kind of like haunting, and like that is the sort of reaction when you do go working into an archive is like this. I think there's like this also responsibility of trying or making an attempt to breathe life into something that maybe hasn't been looked at in a certain kind of way, or something that has been sort of just sitting for a long time.
Right. Yeah.
And the music and the way, just like hearing you kind of talk about that process, I think further allows me to like sit more with the weight of that. Yeah, so I just wanted to like sit with that for a moment.
Yeah. No, absolutely, that's beautiful. The other thing that you saying that makes me think of is, this is gonna sound kind of creepy, you guys, I'm just gonna warn you, but I was on the internet and somebody said something about you have to understand that houses before a certain time, more than likely somebody has died in that house. And we don't wanna think about that. And we've taken the idea of the funeral home and placed it someplace far away. Whereas back in the day, guess what? Where did funerals happen? In people's homes. And so like thinking of death as othering death and not understanding that death is a part of life, which sounds cliche, sure, but that not only that, but that these generations of things, I like to think of them as being concurrent with now. You know, like, I mean, one of my favorite quotes from an Earth, Wind, and Fire song is sounds they never dissipate, they only recreate another space and time, which is kind of Marconi-ish. But it's actually, I think of it as being real. And what is the thing that sort of captures those things for all time? For us, it's media. For me, it's the archive that lets that thing still live as it was new. I had a residency at the arts incubator as well, through Arts in Public Life back in the day, actually working with my archival materials to do the book that Allison mentioned. And one of the things that I wanted to do was take this archive of things from Black Chicago that spoke to me and put them in the space over there at Garfield and like Prairie. And, you know, it's plate glass windows, so people going to the Green Line walk past it. So one of the things I wanted to do is, there were no docents. So I told the security people, I gave them the whole spiel, right? Like, so this is what this is, this is what this is. And I gave them instructions, please let me know if anybody is impacted or has questions, because I just really want to know how this speaks to people. And I'll never forget, one of the security people came up and he said, this woman came in and she stood there for a really long time, and then she looked at me and she said, it's like looking at something in my past that I thought was dead. But it's here.
Yeah.
And for somebody, that is a moment that is just, you think it's just here, but it's there, which I think is so powerful.
Yeah. And I think that's why sorry.
Yeah, I had a moment.
Me too. I'm like, that's a lot to sit with. I'm sorry, y'all. I also had an opening last night for solo exhibition in Bloomington, Indiana, and I've just been in emotional flux because I think part of this film is also tied to that which I was a part of last night, and this sort of thinking about this life, because when you talk about death, it makes me think about the emergence of life and how to sort of like hold on to that. And I think for me, working through this film, I wanted to use water as a mark-making process to pull people into that life force. Because I do think that when people think about the archives, or, you know, I have even people in my family or my uncle, they think it's funny that I collect vinyls, right? But it's like, for me, that is a certain kind of life force that I have access to, because we do live in such a digital space where people have immediate gratification and like accessibility into things. And so I wanted to think about like how to breathe life into something that is not dead, that is continuous, almost like the title of your book, like Energy Never Dies.
Oh no, it's exactly like the title.
Yes, the title of the book is Energy Never Dies. And it's going back into that concept, and like I wanted to I wasn't directly thinking about that book, but also this idea that like these archives and these images, the images that I'm collecting of like my everyday life, of the water, of my family when I am with them, it's like those are like particular moments that I feel are infinite, and they're not as ephemeral as we think that they are. And even going back into the archive, I think it's just such a critical process, and I have so much respect for people who devote their lives to that material, especially like Black cultural material. It's like really, really important that is taken care of. And so part of this was also like, if we're thinking about the future of Chicago, how are we taking care of like this Black cultural material? Like, who are the people who are making sure that these materials don't die out, and that they're present in a certain kind of way, or that people have access to them in the way that that woman on the street had access to like a certain kind of archive that you're tapping into.
Right. And then, understanding that it's not writing that thing off as being nostalgia. Like, oh, wow, those fashions are so cool. Or I really love the almond-shaped nail that really speaks to a certain moment, or this particular color of nail polish, or what have you. But really thinking of, and me being selfish, harvesting that power that is inherent in a lot of this material. Like when you hear it or see it, it's stunning, because what it is full of, the life force that it's full of, is still rich, and it's still fervent, and it's still got that joie de vivre. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, that is a real thing, and it never gets old for me, Yeah.
And even going back to the music, I think that's why, so I think it's like funny, because in one of the videos that I recorded in 2018, we were listening, I think in the background there's a Diana Ross song
Upside
playing,
Down.
Upside Down.
Yeah.
And so like even in that moment, I'm like, that is like a primary example of how like these things are sort of all taking place at the same time. And that was like really intentional. And so when I hear that kind of music, or if I'm listening to Dusty's, because you mentioned the Impressions, I'm like, I love the Impressions. I love the Four Tops. Like, I love all these artists because they bring me back to a particular moment, because when I was growing up, on Saturday or Sunday mornings, like that's what my mom was playing, or like that's what my uncle was playing, or that's what we were listening to in the car. And so I think I constantly listen to that music also as a way to ground myself, or to sort of relive how it felt to like hear that music. And when I do hear that music, it's like a reminder that like I'm being like brought back home in a certain kind of way. Like, even if I don't have accessibility to some sort of idealistic version of home, or like what that could be. And so I think just like the music element in that way, as you were saying, goes beyond the nostalgia aspect, as I think it operates as a life force, for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, I do this DJ gig at the 95th Street Red Line station twice a week. And I always I marvel at people's reaction to the music, because I'm literally doing my best Herb Kent impression. Like, I'm doing all of the records, like the real records. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And not the Time Life compilation of the records, but the real records. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So and people come up and they just have all these comments. It's like, oh my God, we need this energy. We need this, da-da-da-da. This is making my whole day, blah, blah, blah. I think it's something that, we can talk a lot about how in a lot of Black families, we don't have generational wealth that we're passing down. We can think about it in that way. Mm-hmm. I have this weird philosophy called lack versus fat. So either you can think about what you don't have, or you can think about what you do have. And the fat, for me, is thinking about the grease that was in a coffee can on my grandmother's stove. Like, it seems like it's nothing, but for her, she was able to make golden things out of it, mm-hmm. And so I'm looping back, I'm coming back. But in thinking about the music, it's like our cultural heritage is what we have. That's the thing, that's one of the things that we are able to successfully pass down from generation to generation. Thinking about how much was ripped from us we kept passing that down. And an appreciation for that thing, especially, and this is the thing that's funny to me. I talk to people from all over the world and Black people from all over, and they say that there's a thing about Chicagoans and young Chicagoans who actually have maybe more of a reverence for what has come before than maybe in some other cities, and I think that that's really interesting. I don't know that I have a comparative analysis that I can put on that, but it was something interesting to think about, where it's like, rather than being very forward-leaning all the time and always on the next, we do have an appreciation for the big body car and these other things that are significant to us, that feel like something that we want to have within us, if not outwardly out of us. I don't know. That's just a thought.
Yeah, but I also, to bring it back in a different way, it also kind of goes back to, I think, even the kind of things that you're thinking about through this like cultural preservation work and thinking about Black Chicago. Because I feel like this is just a theory, I'm like, it's not fact, but I feel like one of the reasons for that is because our city is like so rich with like political history,
right,
and like so rich with like these really significant Black cultural movements, or like even thinking about like the Johnson Publishing House, like those things happen in Chicago. So it's like when you have a city that is sort of at the center of a certain kind of Black cultural production, or that was sort of at a kind of origin story, right? It's like, that can't be just flattened.
Right.
Like, I feel like you would have to overextend yourself to like, to destroy that. And I feel like it's very strong.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's part of what I'm very fixated in when I think about Black Chicago, specifically this idea that what we were doing, I don't know if there was like an overarching intuition to do it, but we were really creating our own identity, like a brand new identity rooted in self-determination that still speaks to people today. And we're still speaking that language and don't even realize sometimes that the language that we're coming up with was birthed here. So like, for instance, okay, I'll give you an example. So in my book, there was a little bit of conversation about whether I was gonna be capital B Black, where I was gonna use capital B Black in the whole book. I was like, I am, in fact, because, and I don't know if you guys follow this, but AP Style last year decided that B in Black can be capitalized when you're talking about a people group. I said, well, you know what, that's great, but guess what? I'm using Ebony Jet Style, and Ebony Jet capitalized the B in Black. And it wouldn't make sense for me to write this book in any other way. And thinking about like that sort of like audacious way in which to speak about things and speak about ourselves and define ourselves, you know, is like really powerful.
And even on the topic of like self-determination and thinking about like this parallel between like self-definition and collective definition, one of the things that I was also sort of thinking through the archive is this kind of like, I guess, like queering the archive and like really locating queerness within Chicago's history. And I think more recently for me, I've sort of been activating that through the persona and the life of Lorraine Hansberry. And so, of course, you all notice that there's a lot of Lorraine Hansberry footage in the film, archival footage. And I was really kind of thinking about, like, what was this kind of determination that I could tap into through the work of Lorraine Hansberry, but also just, like, as a person. And also sort of referencing things like the party that was happening like in front of that Kuttner footage, or thinking about Angel's performance at the MCA and like really trying to complicate the archive in that way. Because I feel like there's a lot of queer history in Chicago that I feel like hasn't been as visible as it should be. And also I think is another way to just like think through identity and what it means to be like determined as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about the Lorraine Hansberry, she's one of those people, you know, died way too soon, that there's just, and it's a blessing that she was as well documented in her moment and heralded in her day.
Yes.
But I think about her and Diana Sands, think about a lot. But her specifically, because if you know anything about her career, her unfinished piece, Young, Gifted, and Black, they wound up being completed. But thinking about that, that's where the song came from, the concept for the song initially, Young, Gifted, and Black came from that work. Thinking about sort of what she was really grasping onto, and even in the pieces that you pulled from the video, about how she was talking about, it doesn't have to be about the kings and the queens, it's about the minutia, it's about the untold stories, I think is something that I'm really glad that you like threaded through this, because anytime that you can elevate somebody that otherwise maybe, I don't want to say is lost to time, but I think as generations progress, fewer and fewer people are saying her name. They're saying Baldwin, and God bless Baldwin.
Oh, love Baldwin.
But he lived long enough to where he was like, the hell you won't. You will speak my name. Whereas she passed away, right? You know what I'm saying? And right when she was arguably at her, just entering her creative peak.
Right. And also just to tie it back to Young, Gifted, and Black, I read it this past summer, reread it this past summer, and I was spending a lot of time with that book, and that's actually where I pulled the title of the film from. If you've read Young, Gifted, and Black, what I really love about it is that it sort of breaks apart Lorraine Hansberry's career in a way that invites you into some of her letters, or into very sort of private moments in her life. And this word infinite came up several times within Young, Gifted, and Black. And a part of me feels like, and from experience of reading, she wrote 5 short lesbian stories under a pen name. At the time, she identified as a lesbian but wasn't open, but she wrote these really just like heart-wrenching short stories. And in one of them, she actually, in a kind of way, as I'm thinking back to the infinite, feel that she knew that her time on this earth was very limited, because the story, in a way, was an exact mirroring of how she died and how she passed away. And it was cancer. And and I just think about that, like this idea of the infinite and like what's able to live on after a person is no longer here. And I think that sort of in thinking about Baldwin, I think people are wanting to reach back into Lorraine's archive and into her life because it hasn't been studied enough. And beyond A Raisin in the Sun, she wrote so many other plays that were hyper-political, that were sort of rooted in Marxist and communist theories, and of course people were not ready for that at the time, especially from a Black woman and a Black queer woman. And so just to kind of like honor that, I think that I'm also happy and grateful that like folks are sort of interested in that conversation, because like you said, it's like everyone talks about Baldwin, but it's like, what about Lorraine?
Yeah.
You know, and her contributions.
There's a long list of whatabouts
that
I'm happy to help instigate, for sure. And I'm glad that you're also a co-conspirator in that. It's powerful. So it is 2:27. I work in radio, so let me tell you what. If I'm not prompt, the show doesn't go on. So we said 2:30, yeah? I definitely want to thank everybody who made this possible. I'm glad that you reached out to me.
It had to be you. Yes.
One last thing I just wanted to note, because we've talked about sort of the infinite and energy never dies, and this is not a commercial for my book, but since we brought it up, the reason why I called it Energy Never Dies is that I was at my kitchen table with my grandmother, who Holy Angels Parish, wound up going to Hirsch High School, did the whole movement, South Side movement thing, very rooted in Chicago, really dope woman. She found out she had stage 4 cancer. And everybody in my family was flipping out. And she and I, we were sitting there just really at peace with it, because let me tell you what, she lived her life. Do you know what I'm saying? Everything that she ever wanted to do, that she thought, that everyone told her as a Black woman she could not do, she did it, or found a way to make it happen. And so what she said to me, she said, I know everybody's flipping out, but at the end of the day, energy never dies. And so like when I thought about that, that's such a great way to sort of think about this and think about just in general, everything that I have experienced like with this archival material and what it's really, what's resonating with me is that concept that, yeah, absolutely, it doesn't. It doesn't dissipate. It just recreates in another space and time. Right. Totally. Yes. I didn't even cry, you guys, because I am exactly that person. Oh no, sorry, Allison. Yeah, I mean, because I just, it's so true though. I mean, it's still here.
I mean, I was with my mom maybe like a month and a half ago or 2 months ago, and pulled up a photo of me and my grandmother that I had not seen in a very long time, and you're right, like it doesn't die out, right? So it's like I also see it as a kind of like honoring ancestors in a way where it's like even if they may not see it themselves, we can live it, or it's lived through us.
Right. We're continuing that. Like every day we get up in the morning, like we, we are ancestors' wildest dreams, whatever, but really, we actually are.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you all for coming to this. And thank you to Chicago Humanities Festival, Allison, and thank you to Nancy from Chicago Film Archives also for just being so generous and allowing us to use this footage, and everybody else who took time out to come. Thank you so much.